Hi there, Mrs. Elke here, and thank you for joining me today on Elke Art. Today I'm making some heart art, and I wanted to kind of do a little bit of mixed media. So mixed media is when you use more than one kind of thing to make your artwork. So in this case, we're using some watercolor and we're using some oil pastel. And I thought this would be a fun one to do. So here is my project. Notice it's kind of a geometric heart, which I thought would be super cool. I do recommend that you give yourself some dry time because the first step where we make this super cool background will take a little while to dry. Or you can pull out a hair dryer if you've got one of those around. That can help speed up the process too. But I used some watercolor paper, I used some oil pastel, paintbrush, things like that. So try this out with me, have fun, and if you're liking these videos, hit that like button and subscribe down below for more fun art tutorials on my channel, Elke Art. Thanks so much for watching. Love having you join me on these art adventures. For this project, I have a piece of 8 by 8 inch watercolor paper, but you can use whatever size you have. I also have watercolor that has been squirted into my little palette here. I'm using a little bit of a wider brush, and I have a spray bottle to use too. You don't need a spray bottle, you can just use a big brush, but sometimes it just kind of speeds up the process. So I also have a picture of a heart that I printed off. I just typed in vector geometric heart, something like that, or geometric heart coloring, and it needs to be the size of my paper. I'm going to put that aside for now. I'm going to spray my paper with some water, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. This way my water won't curl. So you see how it's kind of curling already? If I spray the back of my paper and then kind of squeeze it down onto my surface, then it won't curl when I'm adding water to the front. And I'm using a pretty wet paper for this. It's also important to use watercolor paper for this because if you use regular paper, it could probably rip pretty easily in this step. So I've got my watercolor paper nice and wet on the front and the back, and now I want to add some color. And I recommend sticking with a color scheme. So I'm going to use warm colors, but you could also do a cool color scheme. So I'm starting with yellows, and you can either tap on the paper or you can kind of splatter paint like I am here. Notice I hold my finger very close to my paper and then just gently tap my brush, and it needs to be a very wet brush to work. If it doesn't have enough water, you can dip it in water. There we go. And get it nice and wet. And then I gently tap it on my finger to get kind of that splattered effect. And I'm really trying not to brush my paint in any way. I want it to kind of just do a little dance, mix a little bit on its own on the paper rather than me mix it for it. So I'm just splattering some color, making sure that my brush is wet enough that the paint comes off my brush when I splatter it. And I'm trying to stick with my color scheme, which in my case is warm colors. So I've got some yellow, some orange, and I'm using some pink, and I'm just kind of trying to get color all over my watercolor paper. I'm actually touching the paper too, but I'm trying just to do it in dots, and I'm trying not to brush too much because I do want it to be a very free flow type of picture. I can also go back in and spray a little bit, which can kind of help the colors like intermingle on the paper. So I am trying to get a good amount of color on there. Liquid watercolors would also be really good for this background step because we do want it to be nice and fun and rich in color. So I'm going to continue doing that until I feel like my paper is full enough of color, and then I have to let it dry. And it might take a while considering we got the front and the back wet. So put it off to the side and let it dry. All right, next I'm using some oil pastels, and it actually works better if you take the wrapper off of them so that you can use them on the side. You don't have to, you can always use them on the top and just color, but it's faster if you turn it sideways like this. And I really want to try to get a lot of color right behind my heart picture. So I'm trying to push down pretty hard and I'm trying to get a good amount of color off of my pastel. Now this definitely works better with darker pastel colors or brighter colors. I wouldn't try like a white or a yellow necessarily because that might not show up as well. So I'm using a darker pink, like a magenta, and I'm really pushing hard right behind where my heart is, making sure that every part of the paper behind my heart has pastel on it. And I'm trying to kind of push down with all my finger muscles until that's done. All right, so behind my heart, I've got my color. I'm going to go ahead and lay it down on my dry paper now. I let it dry completely. And I want to try to center it right where I want it. And I'm going to use a little piece of tape to hold it in place. Now I can go ahead and transfer my heart to my background. And to do that, I'm going to press pretty hard with my pencil right on the lines of my heart uh, picture here. And as I draw the lines on my heart, then they should be transferring to my paper. And I do recommend as you are doing this that you may want to lift up your paper and check. Are your lines actually transferring to your paper? If they are not, you might have to add a little bit more oil pastel. You can see mine are transferring just fine. I can see them, so I am good to go. If they weren't showing up, I would just go back in and add more pastel to the back of your picture. It probably means you didn't push hard enough or get enough pastel there. All right, I'm going to push really hard with my pencil and I'm going to continue to trace all of the parts of my heart picture here until I get them all done and down onto my background that is so beautifully painted with watercolor. And I'm really just trying to push down hard with my pencil. I'm making sure that I get all of the lines. If you really wanted to get fancy, you could use a ruler to make sure all these lines are nice and straight. But I feel like just following these lines is pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that all of my lines are on this heart. All right. Oh, one more. Now I have all of it traced. I can check. Yep, I think I got them all. I can take the tape off and now I have my heart to work from. Now, once you have your design on your paper, there's a lot of things you can do. I decided that I wanted to go back over my lines with an oil pastel to make them a little bit thicker and darker, but really it's up to you as to what you do. You could just dive right in with paint if you want. You could even use a different kind of paint. I mean, this is mixed media, so you could go in with tempera paint or acrylic paint and make it really fancy. But I decided to use oil pastels and I am going in with my same color, which is my magenta because it fits with my warm color scheme, and I'm just outlining my entire heart. I'm also thinking at this point what else I want to do or add to make this heart kind of come to life. So what other things could I do? I mean, I could take some other warm colors of oil pastels and I could fill in my heart with different colors of pastel. Maybe each shape gets a different color. Or maybe I could go back in with some paint and do some painting on each one. I mean, there's really so many different options, and you are the artist, so feel free to get creative with what you do. I think after my outline is done, I want to add a little bit of pastel shading. So I'm going to pick one side to add a little bit of darkness to, and I'm not even pushing down all the way. I decided that I wanted the left side of each of my shapes, maybe kind of the left or the bottom, a little bit darker. So I'm just going in and adding a little bit of shading to the left side of each shape of my heart. Maybe the right side will be lighter and the left side will be darker. So I thought that might be interesting, and it might make my heart look like it's kind of popping off the paper just a little bit more. Now I'm doing this with oil pastel, and it's showing up nice and dark on my paper, but you could use whatever kind of materials you would like. Next, I thought I might go back in with some watercolor. So I'm going to bring my watercolor back over here next to my picture. And I think I want to add a little bit of watercolor on the left side of each of my shapes as well, because I wanted just a little bit more color so it stands out from the background. So I'm finding a brush, and I'm going to go ahead and get some pink, and I'm going to start kind of darkening the left side of each of these shapes. Now the oil pastel resists watercolor because it has like that oil, that waxy feel. The watercolor kind of repels off of it. So that's kind of fun. You can kind of use that to your advantage. But I'm going and adding a little bit of dark to the left, and then I just want it to kind of fade out into the rest of the shape. So I can do that by just adding clear water right on the edge of my color, and that will kind of lighten it a little bit so it fades out into the shape. I'm going to do that on all of my shapes here. Darken one side and try to have it fade off into the other side. And I'm just using pink the whole time. But again, you're the artist. You could add whatever colors you would like. I'm adding a little bit of clean water too, just to help it kind of blend out into the shape. And I want to kind of do the same thing on all of my shapes so that they kind of go well together. And then I think after darkening the left side of all of my shapes, I might even go back in and add a little bit of light or a different color to the right side. And I'm choosing to stay in my color scheme the whole time. I like the idea of staying with this warm color scheme. So I've got this pink on the left, and I'm thinking maybe I'll add orange or yellow to the right, since those are other warm colors. I'm going to clean my brush, and I think I'm going to go with some yellow. So on the right side of each of my shapes, I want to add just a little more yellow, kind of a pop of bright, just to kind of make it stand out a little bit more from the background. By adding this another layer of color, it will darken the watercolor, I'll make it more vibrant, and so that just kind of makes it pop off of the more faded background. And again, I'm just trying to stay on one side, and it just kind of makes it more interesting to have that bright color. If they do kind of blend in the middle a little bit, that's totally fine too, because pink and yellow blended will make maybe some oranges. All right, I am liking how that's looking. I think the only other thing I want to do is maybe go back in and splatter a little bit more, but this time on some dry paper. So I have to make sure that my brush is plenty wet, and I can get it with whatever warm colors. I'm going to do yellow, and then maybe I'll do some pink. And I'm just going to, again, hold my finger right above my paper and tap my paintbrush on it just to get a little bit more splatter on my finished piece. I am liking how that's looking. I'm not going to go too crazy, but I do want to have some fun dots here and there on my picture. Remember, splatter's easier the more juicy your brush is, so get lots of water on it. And there you have my finished heart art. Thanks so much for joining me today on Elke Art, and please come back again for more fun art tutorials.